You just got to go with the flow, you know. But it's very good to know that God's with us. So no matter what happens, it's all good, and it'll work out in the end. So anyway, as we're handing out copies, tonight we're going to be talking again in the book of Proverbs. If you want to turn over there, we're going to be primarily in the 5th, 6th, and 7th chapter of the book of Proverbs. And when I selected this topic, it was called purity, and I thought, oh, well, that's a good topic. And little did Barry tell me that this is a topic on illicit sex, okay? Because it really, really is. We're not talking about marriage necessarily, sex within marriage. This series of scriptures that I've been given to talk on clearly talks about adultery. And so that's our topic tonight. This is not for children, and I'm glad to see that we don't have any in the audience because it's probably not that appropriate. But as I began to study this, Proverbs is a deep, deep book of knowledge, and so it's almost impossible to talk exhaustively about any section of Proverbs because there's so much more to it. But as I began to think about it, I called my brother, Herb Woollard, who's a minister at the Church of Christ there in Crossville, Illinois, and he said he had just read a book called The Principle of the Path. Has anybody heard that? Barry's shaking his head. The Principle of the Path. It's by Andy Stanley. You can get it on Kindle for $3.99. You can add the audio book for another $10.99. So the good thing about it is it spends chapter 3 talking exactly about what we're going to discuss tonight, and that is that we're all on a path, every one of us. In fact, can you imagine how many of you to get here tonight had to go on Signal Hill Road? Everybody's going to raise their hands. Everybody will. It's not possible to get to this building without driving down Signal Hill. Now, if you really intended to get here, but you went and you turned south on Dumfries Road, would you get here? No, best of intentions aside, no matter how bad you wanted to get to the church building, you couldn't make it off Dumfries if you just stayed on Dumfries Road. Because the principle of the path says you go where the road goes. No matter how much you intend to go somewhere else, you go where the road goes. Now, what if you were brilliant? What if you were one of the smartest people in the world and you got on 495 and you didn't believe in Route 66 or 28, they didn't fit your worldview? Would you get to Manassas? Not really. If you stick on 495, you're going to go around and around and around D.C., but you will never get to Manassas, no matter how bright you are. Again, the principle of the path. You get on there, it takes you to where it takes you, and that's it. Because the people that built the road built the intelligence into the road that if you stay on the road, that's where you go. And so tonight as we look at the book of Proverbs, especially chapter 5, 6, and 7, you're going to see the principle of the path played out in a dramatic way, especially in chapter 7. And chapter 7 is graphic, okay? There's just no other words about it. I mean, now, in the handout I gave you, unfortunately, I kind of started at the beginning, went through, and then I realized tonight that we probably need to read part of chapter 7 first, because that is really the crux of the matter. If you'll flip over to to page 4 in my handout, you will notice there, starting in verse 6, Solomon starts and he tells, either some commentators think it's a parable, or other commentators think that it's his own self-experience, and he's just kind of telling on himself. And others think that he actually had a good vantage point and was able to see all this. But Solomon writes in Proverbs chapter 7, starting in verse 6, and I'm reading from a version called the version that I'm reading from is called the New International Reader's Version. And I picked this one because it's a very explicit version of the Bible. It doesn't leave out any details, and it's very simple. So it's not going to mask anything as we read through this. So, get your mind going, get your imagination going, because this is as graphic as text as you'll find anywhere in the Bible. It says, "As I stood at the window of my house, I looked down through it, and among those who were childish, I saw a young man who had no sense. He went out into the street near that sinful woman's corner. He walked toward her house. The sun had gone down, and the day was fading. The darkness of night was falling. A woman came out to meet him. She was dressed like a prostitute and had a clever plan. She was wild and pushy. She never stayed at home. Sometimes she was in the streets. Sometimes she was at other places. At every corner she waits. She took hold of the young man and kissed him, and with bold face spoke to him. She said, 'Today I have offered what I promised I would. At home I have meat left over from my fellowship offering. So I came out to meet you. I looked for you, and I found you. I have covered my bed with colored sheets from Egypt. I have perfumed my bed with spices. I used myrrh and aloes and cinnamon. Come, let us drink our fill of love until morning. Let us enjoy ourselves by sleeping together. My husband isn't home. He has gone on a long journey. He took his bag full of money, and he won't be home for several days.' She led him astray with her clever words. She charmed him with her smooth talk. All at once he followed her. He was like an ox going to be killed. He was like a deer stepping into a trap until the arrow stuck in its liver. He was like a bird rushing into a trap. Little did he know that it would cost him his life." And then Solomon talks to the rest of us, and he says, "My sons, listen to me. Pay attention to what I say." He's stomping his foot here. "Don't let your hearts turn to her ways. Don't step into her paths. She has brought down a lot of men. She has killed a huge crowd. Her house is a road to the grave. It leads down to the place of death." And as you read this man's plight, you begin to realize that he had a problem with his path. He'd gotten on the wrong one. The story starts out and it says, well, as you begin to think about the path, you realize that God's given us paths for many things. For health, but there's some people that go down the path of smoking, and they're always surprised when they get cancer. And there's some people, there's financial paths that are good, but some people go down the path of spending a lot of money, and they go into debt, and they end up bankrupt. And it's always surprising when it comes to find them. They're always saying, "How in the world did I get here?" And when you look at their problem, they don't need a fix, because there is no fix. They need to get on the right path. And most of our problems that we cause are because we're on the wrong path in some way. This man's problem was, as you begin to look at it, as Solomon looked out the window, he said, first of all, he had no sense. Now, some commentators said, well, he was a young man, so he wouldn't have had any sense anyway, because young people don't have any sense. I don't believe that. I think there's some wise young people, and there's some that aren't so wise. This man chose not to have sense. It seems like he just chose not to have common sense. He chose to reject the teachings of his father, and we'll see that in the other chapter. Solomon talks about that. But notice what he did. It says he went down the street near that sinful woman's corner. Now, he wasn't close to her house yet, but he was headed that way. He was on the path that he had chosen. Obviously, he knew this woman, some speculate. Maybe they had had these rendezvous before. We don't know. But he went down the street toward the sinful woman's corner. Then it says he walked toward her house. Okay? So not only did he go toward the corner, he was in the wrong part of town. Then he headed directly toward temptation. And then he kind of waited around to get caught. Now contrast that with Joseph in Potiphar's house. Joseph had a problem, as you remember. He was a slave in Potiphar's house, and Potiphar's wife came after him and says, "Come lay with me." Kind of like this woman says, "Let's have sex. My husband won't know." Well, what did Joseph do? Well, Joseph didn't wander down the hallway toward her room and wait to get caught, okay? That's what this young man did, okay? So there's a good way to handle this, and there's a bad way. Temptations are going to come. Every man in this room has been propositioned by somebody at some time, irregardless of whether he's married or not. I just got one today. It came in through my internet connection to my email, and it said, "I'm leaving my husband, come meet up with me and we can exchange pictures or whatever." And I'm like, what in the world? How do I get this stuff? There it was. That was that woman. She's hanging out. She's looking for who she can reel in one more time. Now, I'm not being negative on women. Don't get me wrong here. This can work the other way around too. Men do the same thing to women, okay? It's a different dynamic, but it's the same thing going on. But every man struggles with this temptation. And if you say you don't struggle, I will categorically say I don't believe you, okay? Plain and simple. I'm looking at all the men, and I don't see anybody going, "Oh, I'm fine. It never bothers me," It does. When a woman walks into a room, you notice her. Why? Because you're wired that way. Now, what you do after that is a whole nother thing. But we notice women. This man noticed this woman. That's just natural. But what he did after that, well, that's the rest of the story, okay? So he's wandering down. He gets toward her house, and notice when he's down there. He's not down there in broad daylight. He's not down there conducting business in the town or buying something. No, he's down there near dusk. You ever drive at dusk? You can't really tell what's there, He wanted to conceal what he was doing. See, if he was at night, he might have had a light and they might have seen who he was, but at dusk, you had enough light that you could get around, but not so much light that you could see who that was down the street. Now, I don't know how Solomon saw all this, but he did. Okay, maybe he had a different vantage point. I don't know. But this young man was out there at night, and he was trying to conceal himself, and notice, it works. She sees him coming. Now, other people didn't see this happening. They probably thought he was just trying to get home before night. But that woman, she's looking for him. Now, he thinks she's looking for him because he's this good-looking hunk, okay? He thinks, hey, I got it all going on here. That's my interpretation. Solomon says, not so quick, Einstein. She's looking for you because she needs another man to take down, okay? And the interesting thing is, and we'll read some of this, Solomon compares her to a prostitute. And he says the prostitute's better. When you stack and rank them, the prostitute beats this woman because at least the prostitute just works for bread. He works for money. There's no real connections here. We're going to read that this woman is out for this man's life, okay? She's out to take him down. So she comes out to meet him, and she's dressed like a prostitute. Okay, she's hanging her shingle out. It's obvious. I want to have sex. Here I am. Now, that should have been his first clue, but he wasn't taking any clues at this point, okay? He was thinking what she was thinking. But she was telling everybody, hey, this is who I am. She was dressed for business, the business of taking men down. She was dressed for illicit sex. She was dressed like a prostitute and had a clever plan. Wow, that's a bad combination. She's dressed for action, and she knows what she's doing. And it's a clever plan because, hey, we learn later on, it's worked with a lot of other men. She's taking them down, okay? So she's out there, and then it goes on to talk about the type of woman she was. She's wild and pushy, never stays at home. Sometimes she's in the streets, sometimes she's other places. At every corner she waits. What's she doing? I mean, this guy needs to be looking and going, why is she like that? I mean, when you see a shark, you know a shark is waiting for that next fish to come along. It's everywhere, you know. It's looking here, it's looking there, and she's looking everywhere. This woman's checking all of her traps. Can I track the man here? What about that one? What about that one over there? She's all around. She's looking. And she's dressed for business. Every man that sees her knows what she's about. The interesting thing is, she obviously knew this man because she takes hold of him and she kisses him. Well, now, was that so bad? Now, that was the pleasurable part, okay? Don't get this wrong. This isn't a bad experience for this guy on the surface. I mean, he's thinking, this is great. She's kissing me. What else is going to go on? And with bold face, she spoke to him. Now, verse 14 is a little bit strange. Today I have offered what I promised I would. At home I have meat left over from my fellowship offerings. And when I read that, the meat that she has left over, she promised what she would because she's been at the temple and she's had an obligation. She fulfilled a vow. She has posed as a devout religious person. And you say, how could that be? Well, I'm telling you, in the churches of Christ and in other churches, there are people like this in the church. And you say, oh, may it never be. Personal experience with people that I know, there is a minister in the Church of Christ who was fired because his wife was having sex with another church member. Guess what they would do? They were the evangelistic team for the church. They would go out, have Bible studies with people, even baptize them, and then they would go off and have an affair. And that actually happened. I know the people involved. And the woman is still unrepentant. She's pretty much hasn't ever come to the fact that that was wrong. It's incredible. We'll read other places where it says that she doesn't know what she's doing is wrong. And I've got to tell you, this is unbelievable. You read it in Proverbs until you see it in practice. It's hard to understand how somebody could do this, and in their own mind, they've justified it. But that's what's happened here. This man has justified it, and she has justified it. I just came from worship. Oh, I still got some fellowship offering left. Some commentators believe that means, hey, we can sin tonight, and we can go back and offer some more offering and get forgiveness. Yeah, go ahead. Interesting.
So that right there was a violation of the law.
Mickey is saying the fellowship offering wasn't supposed to be consumed at home. So you should have never had it at home to start with. So what was she doing with it at home?
I think she was trying to show him that she was somehow pious. I think that's what that is. You know, I've done pious things. Pay no attention to what we're going to do. I'm a pious woman. I think that's the root that's going on.
Interesting. Go ahead.
Or I'm a pious woman, and therefore I'm telling you that this is okay.
Right.
Using that as a way of convincing the young man that this is all legit. This is what's supposed to happen.
It sounds like a great justification for me. If you can sin a little and get forgiven a little, it seems to work for them.
I think your comparison of her to Potiphar's wife is an asinine, because her sexual aggression is really off the charts. We got to remember, this is a burqa-wearing culture. I mean, even prostitutes prevail in this culture. And so for her to be this brazen to kiss a man in public, let alone speak to a man in public street is not, but to kiss a man in public, I mean, this is a woman who has decided she wants this man, and she's going to get this man, and she has this man also.
Right. The interesting thing about this is She kisses him. She tells him, hey, I've offered I have fulfilled my vows. I've been to worship, and then I came out to meet you. Now, she's deceiving him. You think she was really just interested in finding him? Or do you think, like a shark, any fish would have done? Any fish would do. Go ahead.
Well, and there's the other side of this is back to your comment on the path. This man, boy, whatever, he didn't take a long way around. He knew where he was going.
Right.
He says at dusk, walk past her window. So she knows she's got fish from the get-go. She's already got somebody who's going to be susceptible to what she wants.
Right.
Whereas Joseph planned and, in my opinion, was prepared for what Potiphar's wife came at him with. This gentleman, boy, man, in some ways he went looking for it, probably thinking to himself, somebody comes out, it's destiny. And she just stated she tried to turn this into a religious experience on top of something that's evil. So two people really playing a role here to cause this bad thing to happen.
And you got to wonder when she goes on, and she describes the sex experience before they have it. She visualizes it for him. She lays it out there. She's got the bed, she's got the sheets, she's got the myrrh and the aloes and the scents, and then she says what they're going to do. Let's drink full. You can stay here all night. And he's like, well, really, all night? She says, yeah, my husband. She's got it all figured out. My husband, he isn't home. He's gone away on a long journey. He's taken lots of money with him. We know he's going to be gone for a while. Some says till the new moon, but that indicates that he would be gone for several days. So there was no possibility that he was going to be back there interrupting this union, okay? And it says in verse 21, she led him astray with her clever words and charmed him with her smooth talk. And then verse 22 says something really interesting. Up to that point, she was putting all this into him. And then it says, all at once. I think he was weighing it. What am I going to do? I really, like you say, I walk down the street. This is better than I could have hoped for. Wow, this is really happening. Let me pinch myself. And all at once, he buys it. It's like she's already doing whatever she's done to other men. She's far down the path. But he is still trying to take that path. There's a fork where he could have walked away, okay? He could have continued and said, no, I'm not doing that, okay? Great offer and really boosted my ego to think that somebody would think of me that way, but no, I'm not doing that. Not so. All at once, he followed her. That was it. That was it. Some paths are so slippery that once you get on them, you're done. When he followed her, there was no coming back. He was like an ox going to be killed. He was like a deer stepping into a trap. And from what I can tell, the deer stepping into the trap, the deer steps into the trap, can't get away, and then the archer can get a really good beat on him and kill him. Just right. Won't mess the meat up. You know what I'm saying? So this gentleman stepped in the trap, and she was going to take him down just right, okay? Wouldn't mess her reputation up at all. She could still be that pious person. But it was going to take him down. Like a bird rushing into a trap, little did he know that it would cost him his life. So, once again, Solomon is saying, hey, don't step into her paths, okay? And he's saying to us, that man, he thought he was the exception to the rule. The person that's smoking, they think they're the exception to the rule for getting cancer, don't they? Yeah, I've heard them. I've talked to people that smoke. They go, oh, yeah, well, I know a person that was 90 years old, and they were smoking 2 packs a day, and they were just fine. Yeah, that's true. But that's the exception to the rule. Solomon says, she has brought down a lot of men. A lot of men. Okay? This means you're not that unique, okay? And you aren't the exception to the rule. She has killed a huge crowd. We're talking somebody that's done this a lot. She spent many years doing this. She knew just what to do. It's so broad, it says her house is a road to the grave. And all I could think about is Jesus saying, wide is the way and broad is the path, and many there are that go that way. You know, where Jesus is talking about hell. That's what we see here. Why? Because that man was on the wrong path. What if he'd have taken a different route that night? He would have never gone past her house. They would have never met up. Well, something was in his heart that made him choose that path. He was done before he ever got to her house. His fate was decided by himself because of the road he was on, just like your fate's decided when you get on Signal Hill Road that you're going to go past this church. You would be insane to think you could get on a road and it goes somewhere different every time. I mean, we see that in science fiction films where the wormhole ends somewhere different, but that's not how it is in reality. You get on the path, that's where you end up. Well, let's go. This young man, had what Anley Stanley in his book calls the great disconnect. Somehow he wanted a better life. He wanted a relationally richer life. But yet he got on a path that undermined his relationships. He wanted good things, but he got on a path that provided bad things. He wanted independence. Hey, I can do this on my own. Look at me. I'm my own man. But yet he got on a path that got him snared into a situation he couldn't get out of. And once he went with her, he was done. Now, keep in mind, this can work the other way. Women can be tempted by men. Once they go with them, they're done too. Okay, so you must understand that sexual purity is a decision you make early on. Because once you get on that slippery path, you can't stop. Have you ever been in an ice storm and you think you can walk on the ice and you're doing fine, and then somehow there gets to be water on the ice, and all of a sudden you experience zero friction? Has that happened to somebody? Zero friction? That's really scary, because you're standing up and you can't move. If you move, you're going down. And even if you don't move, most likely you're going down. That's how slippery this path was. Once he made a decision to go with her and get on that street, maybe minutes or hours before, he was done. I can't emphasize enough that sexual purity, unlike so many other things, once you slide down that path, you probably aren't coming back without a lot of pain. Let's read about some of the pain that Solomon talks about. We've got the story in mind, but Solomon builds up to this story. He kind of puts this at the end of his description, at the end of his comments. Let's turn over to page 2. Page number 2. We're going to start in Proverbs chapter 5, and we'll read there. Solomon starts, "My son, pay attention to my wisdom. Listen carefully to my wise sayings. Then you will continue to have good sense. Your lips will keep on speaking words of knowledge." You know, Solomon is saying you've got to value wisdom. Because if you don't value wisdom now, you're going to get on that wrong path, okay? Then he goes on to talk about this particular path. "A woman who commits adultery has lips that drip honey. What she says is smoother than olive oil. But in the end, she's like a bitter poison. She cuts like a sword that has two edges. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave. She doesn't give any thought to her way of life. Her paths have no direction, but she doesn't realize it. That's an interesting statement there at the end. There's a lot of people out there that believe if you've got action, if you're doing something, you must be a person worthy of following. You know, this woman was described as being pushy and being loud, and she had a lot of action in her life.